Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off.
Blast off on another epic episode of the Hyper-Anomalous Esoteric Research Organization podcast, aka Hero Paranormal, broadcasting from the base at La Madre Mountain, just south of Area 51. My name is Ryan, the paranormal pontificator of the airwaves, bringing you a passionate podcast today. On today's podcast, we have the ever-brilliant author, coach, musician, speaker, and founder of the Conscious Music School, Simon Siddol. Working at the intersection of music and shamanism, he specializes in higher consciousness studies and practices. Simon helps musicians bring higher consciousness into their skill sets and then into their music. His overarching mission is to nurture in the flowering in the West a musical culture that actually benefits the psychic health of the populace, to reveal to both audiences and musicians the true shamanic powers and dangers of music, to restore the West's valuing and acknowledgement of music as a high magical art form. We are going to delve into the reality of the power music holds, how demonic entities have been introduced in music historically, and what those possible effects have been. Among Simon's long list of credentials, he is also an astrologer, head coach, and expert of music theory, allowing him the keys to be able to deconstruct complex symphonies and explain them in layman's terms. Aside from his astounding background of accomplishments and his ever-increasing knowledge base, Simon is one of the nicest guys around, which is why I've always enjoyed talking to him, whether on the air or off. This is going to be a real pleasure. Simon, welcome to the Hero Paranormal Podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back, and thank you for that lovely introduction.
Of course. There's so much ground to cover, and you're just the guy to do it. There's been a long history of how music has been used in magic and by the elites, and basically those who know, and those who don't. Music is a high magical art form. What got you going along this path? And music as a ritual, where is it in today's society?
Okay, quickly about where I got on this path. I had this feeling when I was 17 or 18. I started learning music when I was 10. By the time I was at college studying it at 17 or 18, and teachers were trying to teach me lots of technical, complicated things about music, while I was, happy to absorb that kind of thing, I felt like the education I was getting was missing out on the subtler emotional and energetic aspects of music, and how that has changed over time, and how really musicians are working in that realm from the start. I found that, when you go to a university or college about it, because it's a field of what do you call it, academia, that they have to pull it apart on a mental plane in order to justify having a course to teach. Except that with something like art, the visual art or music or something like that, in the background, there is something that is more important than anything that the mind can really structure and grapple with properly. that it's the very reason why the artist or the musician is doing it in the first place. And it became obvious to me by the time I was 20 that music education, centers of music education, were really not just not dealing with this, but were avoiding it. So it became obvious to me that this was something that I had to explore for myself. I even caused consternation with my composition teachers at university by simply going to them and saying, I wrote this piece. It's a stream of consciousness. There is no intellectual reason or structure as to why I wrote it. You'll have to accept it or not. Can you mark that, please? And they found that very, very concerning and difficult. So there was the start of me down this path. I've always been interested in, the subtler aspects of the mind and energy states and things like that. I started learning astrology when I was 11 or 12. So I guess I've always been set up in some way or other to take this path. What was the second question again?
Yes. Where do you believe that the ritual of music being used as a high magical art form is in today's society?
Right. Okay. Well, let me take a slight sideways turn on that question. Have you noticed in the past 2 or 3 years that a vast chunk of the population of the West has started to behave in less and less rational and balanced emotional and intellectual manners? Does that seem a fair statement to you?
Mm-hmm.
I believe that what we are going through right now, some of it may be down to simply the things that people have chosen to inject in themselves recently. Mm-hmm. That's one aspect of it. But another aspect of it is I think we are beginning to experience what I call the thick end of the wedge. The thin end of the wedge being the way that our minds have been conditioned to have certain values and to ignore certain other values over the past 100 years, 200 years. Something that can be traced through the history of music and possibly through the history of art as well, though that's not my milieu. And I think that recently, enough of the things that used to be humanizing aspects inside music, aspects that would bring us to higher parts of ourselves, I think they have now been successfully removed to such a degree and for such a length of time now that the forces behind this movement, be they human or non-corporeal or whatever they are, I couldn't say what they are, I just know that they're there. I think that those forces have come to realize that now is the time where they can put their foot down on the pedal without suffering too much of a backlash, because people's values about what they want in their, well, you might call it art, but nowadays it's mainly entertainment, isn't it? What values they seek inside their music and their art has become so threadbare that it's possible to feed people, well, downright demonic stuff, and it's having a faster and stronger and more immediate effect than it ever has before. And that's what I see as the background push to the way that our society is, well, frankly, losing its mind.
Absolutely. And before we get too far down this, because this is going to be a long chain, we're going to go deep and dark here in just a moment. I want to shine a little bit of light on the beacon that you are, basically you are in this genre, and the work you're doing, and where people can keep in touch with your work, sign up for your courses, figure out the powers and the dangers of music, and rise above them. Can we tell our listeners where they can they can
Sure.
get more Simon. Yes.
Yes, I'll speak about what I offer a little bit later, but if you want to sort of check me out right now, you can find me on the net at TheConsciousMusicSchool.com. And if you go on Facebook, you can find I have a page on Facebook called The Conscious Music School. So you can check me out in both of those places.
That's wonderful. I know I'm going to be signing up. I highly recommend it to all of my listeners. This is something that, historically, music was originated in royalty. I mean, the priesthood class and that of royalty would use these magical rituals of music and the powers it holds. And I just think back to Eliphas Levi's Transcendental Magic book with a passage he had in there about the triple chain and how the great work in practical magic after the education of will and the personal creation of the magus is the formation of the magnetic chain. And these were once accepted and propagated science that were a force of themselves in early centuries. And it seems they are still being used, but not in plain sight, at least not to the average listener. We have the very famous now Operation Mockingbird, which was a large-scale program in the United States put on by the Central Intelligence Agency that began in the early years of the Cold War and attempted to manipulate domestic American news media and organizations for propaganda purposes, and music was not off the table. This was, in fact, one of their main focuses. You hear it often, this joke. And this is a lot of times how the truth is told in plain sight. This joke that if you want to be in the music industry, you have to sell your soul to be in it. You hear it from a variety of people, whether it is, conspiracy theorists like Jesse Ventura, David Icke.
Or just Bob Dylan admitting it openly in interview.
That's right.
He has done such a thing, yeah.
So it's not just a conspiracy theory. This is something where it does seem as if the elite or the Illuminati, if you want to call them that, influence entertainment and the entertainment industries. Although I don't like the term Illuminati because I don't believe it's one-sided. I think there is good and evil. And this would definitely be the secret group on the side of evil. And it's basically, there's countless websites devoted to this very idea. The entertainment industry is one of the avenues that has been traditionally held to take control and power over the people. Have you noticed this in recent years?
Yes, I would take issue with the idea that this use of magic, the magical power inside music, has always been the preserve of the rich people and the royalty. Mm-hmm. I would suggest that actually what's happened is that it was originally people who were genuinely interested in music and genuinely interested in sound, some of whom may have been shamans in the first place, who actually discovered all of this stuff and started using it for probably more human and pro-human and pro-society uses. And yet, as with all things, the rich folk and the folk who think they're in charge decide that anything which has the power to have a large influence over mass numbers of people is something that they ought to take over and keep as their preserve. And while they do that, they also lessen the public perception of how important and how powerful these methods are, so that nobody will even go looking to find the magical powers in it again, so they can keep it and preserve it for their own uses, and nobody else will step on their toes in that area of control.
Yeah, I think that's very key. Moreover, this musical entertainment toolbox that many have become familiar with as mainstream, among those, I think that we have things like Disney with their Nickelodeon with their childhood music shows, we have in more consequence, obviously, and I think a super key, obvious point that magnifies everything is when you have the Super Bowl halftime show each year here in the United States.
Oh, don't get me started.
it's like it's like watching an ancient rite of initiation a lot of times.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about how in more modern times some of it is quite blatant and some of it, especially when dealing with children, is more hidden?
Well, yeah. Let's be straight here. Music has the power to entrain the mind. Anybody who has ever sat and listened to a piece of music and they've lost 5 minutes of their life tapping their foot, and then they sort of come to afterwards and go, oh, that was nice, not knowing what really happened in those 5 minutes. Yeah, you've been through entrainment. Just to throw a little juicy moment into it, just to point out that the word entertainment is the same as the word entrainment with an ET. Mm-hmm. This is while using music to entrain is a perfectly natural and useful thing within the art form. It's not good, it's not evil, it's just part of its function, and it can be used in any way. It is a completely subconscious thing that goes on within music, and that's something that cannot be helped. You can't remain fully conscious while you're being entrained by music. But we all have to remember that it is a conscious choice what music you choose to let entrain you. Now, if music is simple, barbaric, computer-like, robot-like, devoid of complexity, devoid of self-reflection, devoid of an intent to raise the human who experiences the music, and you volunteer to entrain yourself with that music, then you are possibly doing damage to yourself. So while you can look at music and say that, yes, it is a form of magic that once you're listening to it, you may not have a lot of control over what it's doing to you. You do indeed have an awful lot of control over what you choose to listen to in the first place. And what music is more popularly available, more easy to find, more in your face and pushed in your face than any other kind of music nowadays, is music that is, on the whole, anti-human, anti-compassion, anti-intelligence and sophistication. And this is the crux of where we are going to have to make some strong value judgments and draw some strong boundary lines for ourselves if we are going to get back out from underneath the spell of what those rich people and those powerful people have chosen to use music to do to us.
Quick ad here. Sorry for the shameless self-promotion. Just a snippet here. If you have not seen behind the paywall at Hero Paranormal, please go to patreon.com, look up Hero Paranormal, and subscribe. Or you can do the same on Podbean. Go to heroparanormal.com. That's it. Thanks. I'm very glad that you mention a lot of things that people have a hard time understanding, and that one of the things you mentioned was the ET aspect, which reminded me of a song by Katy Perry, who used to be married to somebody I think very highly of, which is Russell Brand, depending on people's thoughts of him. But it's interesting that she had a song that was called exactly that, E.T. And in the lyrics, it said, "You're so hypnotizing. Could you be the devil? Could you be an angel? Your touch magnetizing, feels like I'm floating, leave my body glowing. And it goes on to talk about DNA. And I know that a lot of people believe this song is about somebody she's in love with. However, no one understands exactly who that could have been. And some have perpetrated that it may actually be Russell Brand. But I think that there is a deeper meaning to the possibilities of this. And that, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, is in the lyrics. It's called E.T. And it's not, it's very strange how music always brings sort of these darker elements to the reality. And I think it was Nietzsche who said, without music, life would be a mistake. And here is a guy that basically argued, his philosophy that seemed to dominate a lot of the century with proposing things like nihilism. And where does the mystical left-hand path and music unite, in your opinion?
It's a very, very long way back. Music is this is something that modern scientific research has begun to uncover, is the idea that the way the human mind processes music seems to involve more parts of the brain even than speech. And there are a lot of people suggesting that musical behavior in human beings is actually a behavior older than spoken language. It may even be the root of spoken language in the first place, in that some folks suggest that it's a little like birds using song to up their chances of mating. That human beings may have made vocal displays in the past for the very same purpose, or for purposes of group cohesion or intimidation of enemies, or whatever it might be. But that the processes by which music is conceived of and then performed are something that seem to go underneath the processing centers of language. And if that's the case, then, well, that's magic, surely. If something is, in our minds at a place lower than our linguistic processing, then it's affecting our thought patterns, our emotional behaviors and patterns in a way that, well, this is why we can't adequately put words to the effect of what music does to us. It's because it's older, it's more ancient, it's more deeply ingrained in us.
Yes, and days before this podcast, you sent me an array of amazing music, many of them waltzes and others. And these kind of definitively show a system of introduction, which may be something I'd like to get into, which may be the envelopment or the introduction of possible demonic attributes into music. Can we delve into that a little bit?
Sure. The pieces I sent you Franz Liszt's, forgotten the name. What's his name? Mephisto Waltzes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is just one episode inside the history of music. I personally think that music has been under the control of the rich and the powerful for a very long time. Now I'm segueing between non-corporeal influences and the rich and powerful, but actually I personally believe that the rich and powerful are usually under the influence of non-corporeal controllers. So, it's much the same thing in the end. But what I'm pointing to there by showing you the list, Mephisto Waltzes, is one episode in history where an element of music that had been a pro-human, pro-healthy influence was invaded by something that was going to take music in a very different direction. In the 20th century, sorry, I'm struggling here because I'm thinking of 6 different things at once that I'm trying to bring together here. The 20th century has seen the complete overhaul of what we consider music. If you look at 19th century music, it was almost entirely ruled by melody, harmony, and form. If you look at late 20th century music, and indeed 21st century music, it seems to be entirely informed by rhythm and timbre, the sound world, and the lyrical content, more than anything else. And that's a hell of a leap to go from one place to the other. And it's not something that happened instantaneously. It's something that happened over that whole century, and indeed before the turn of the 20th century. And it could not happen in one instant because the audiences of the time would not accept music that had just thrown away all those values. So it had to be etched away at, chipped away at, slowly, so that these things could be let in. Now, the episode that I'm talking about here is pointing to what's called the emancipation of dissonance, the moment in the early 20th century when complete lack of tonality, atonality, such as Schoenberg and Weber and Berg, first reared its head. The idea that within a piece of music there is no single frequency, no tone, that is a home, that is a beacon, that has been lost entirely, and now we are in a sea of equal possibilities with no hierarchical structure to it. The value of resonance and harmony that was something that the mind could instinctually calculate. All human beings can tell the difference between dissonance and consonance without really thinking about it. You can see it by the way somebody either smiles or pulls a funny face. Yeah, it's a physiological hit on the body, and that value in music was, to some degree, thrown away at the start of the 20th century. Now, that could not have happened if tonality had not been pushed to its outer limits beforehand. And what I'm pointing to when I sent you the Mephisto waltzes is the precursor to a very famous moment in musical history, the publication of Richard Wagner's Tristan and Isolde, which in its prelude has a moment where a chord sequence and a melody leave you in a place where you are not sure what key the piece is in. It could be in one of two keys, and it sits on a line down the middle and doesn't give you the answer. And people credit Richard Wagner with inventing this idea. But actually, Franz Liszt gave him that little snippet of harmony and melody and said, "You like this, go and develop it." So I see Liszt, despite the fact that I very much admire Liszt as a musician, I also see him as a vector for some non-corporeal intelligence coming in and choosing to change the values that we work with in music. Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
And, sorry, something just went off on my phone there for a second. I lost my thread. You can hear the introduction of these, what I might call non-human influences, in the Mephisto waltzes that Liszt wrote. I don't know what your reaction to listening to those pieces was, but my reaction is it's almost like he's insulting some of the strongly held ideas that were around in music composition in the second half of the 19th century. Those pieces do not end in any kind of satisfying or conclusive way, for a start. They have motoric and repetitive elements to them that seem barbaric and guttural by comparison with a lot of music that was being written at the time. They seem there to provoke emotions in the listener which are, well, disturbed, troubled. And I'm really just trying to illustrate here just one little chapter inside what I sort of followed in the last 150 years of history of music, as piece by piece, certain parts of what used to be considered the values inside music have slowly been worn away and thrown away until we are left with texture and essentially machines producing the complexity inside music, while the human element has been pushed right to the edge of the whole mix. And indeed, the only human thing that you hear inside a lot of music published in the last 20 years, pop music and rap and things like that, is the voice. Everything else is done by a machine. Everything else is certifiably machinistic in the way that it produces it in a repetitively perfect way that a human being not only couldn't do, but wouldn't choose to even if they could. There is a magic inside the subconsciously charged inflection in performance. If you ask a live musician to play the same riff 8 times in a row, none of those riffs will be exactly the same. And that is a subtlety inside music that I think is a valuable thing. And when we come to a place where you listen to a record and essentially you're listening to 4 seconds of information just repeated round and round and round with a human voice over the top, then you've already had some of the subtler information within that music stripped from it. On top of which, you'll find that an enormous amount of recordings nowadays where the human voice seems to be the only human part left in the music, even the voice has been drastically altered by computers, be it putting it back in tune if it's a sung melody, or changing its timing, or even distorting it into a robot-like voice.
Weird. And it is non-corporeal and almost inhuman. I think, as mentioned before, incorporating some of the artists we talked about, Bob Dylan, Katy Perry, Lauryn Hill, and even comics like Dave Chappelle, have all admitted that there is a group, which many commonly call the Illuminati, but it has other names. But this group seems to be pulling the strings in the media, and rap music gets a bad rap, I guess pun intended, but for good reason. As you mentioned, Franz Liszt, and with the Wagner connection, has this slipped into modern music? Because I believe hip-hop and rap seem to have been infiltrated more heavily than other genres of the music industry. Messages of extremely low density vibrations, which are also very repetitive, right? And barbaric, provoking emotions of death, drugs, violence in the masses. And besides keeping people down in a lot of ways, including...
I see rap as part of the thick end of the wedge that I was talking about earlier.
I like that.
I give you a short list here of some of the things that were values inside music 150 years ago. There was form inside music. there was themes and thematic exploration, not verbally and lyrically, but musically, thematic exploration. There was consideration of tuning and temperament, what kind of arrangement of pitches that you choose to make scales out of. There was complex beat structure, meaning that music did not have to simply repeat the same rhythmic grooves over and over again, but that there was a background structure to it that was not explicit, but was the model, an implicit model, from which the explicit rhythms formed, and those rhythms were not necessarily the same all the time at all. They went through episodes of different forms within it. Yeah, There was extended time to explore and develop the musical themes inside something. That's something that's happened since the advent of radio play, is that we've got perfectly used to the idea that music ought to be 3 minutes 30 long, or somewhere around that. And to people who've grown up with that, the idea of sitting down to a 45-minute symphony is frankly horrifying. Yeah? There is, to continue this list of values from 150 years ago, there is human timing inside it, and there is human volume control, something that modern-day computer-aided editing of music gets rid of a lot of the time. And then even more blunt and yet seemingly invisible to the modern listener, there is being there in person to listen to acoustically produced music. That's something that we have, even when people think, oh, I don't want to listen to a record, I want to go to a concert nowadays. If you go to a pop concert, well, sorry, but you're actually just listening to a record and watching people dance anyway. And in fact, you're not even listening to such a high-quality record as you would if you put it on in your own home, because in a large auditorium, they can't afford to put things in stereo because it will destroy the whole sound of it across such large spaces. So you're listening to a mono recording of essentially the same tune. Even if that's not the case and you're listening to a band, that band is almost always put through a recording desk and through amplification. So the actual imprint of the musician's muscular efforts to produce the sound is essentially drowned out. It's essentially, 1% of the actual force of the music hitting you, 99% of it being electrically amplified. Yeah? And then at the end of all of that list of values, there is the idea that, well, we have art that is a challenge to the mind, a challenge to the emotion, maybe a challenge to the spirit, versus entertainment, which is a soporific little treat to soothe you. Yeah? And all of those things have been clearly removed inside rap. And this is part of the reason why, you note the fact that the lyrical content of rap is usually of an extremely low vibration nowadays. And part of the reason for that is because the I don't even want to call it the musical style, because I don't consider it musical anymore at all. But the style of what they're doing is so removed from the things inside music that could improve the human condition that it suits lyrics of extreme low vibration. And it's that slow chipping away over decades and decades and decades that's got us to a place where people think this is normal, and therefore they volunteer to put their ears to it and to be affected by it, and it's not doing us very much good. Even though, you might enjoy some rap, it might give you some physiological pleasure bobbing along to the beat, it might give you some mental pleasure in listening to the lyrical content and agreeing with some of the lyrical ideas inside it. Anything else that's was once considered commonplace as a part and parcel of how you enjoy music, what it is that you can take from music, has been bleached out of it.
I look back at my own musical development and how it has been completely programmed. I remember the first vinyl album I purchased was NWA, F the Police. And I remember my mom coming.
I do love that tune.
It is amazing.
Lyrics.
And I remember my mom coming home early one day. I was quite young, and she heard this playing, and obviously, as any good parent would have, she pulled it from the record player and broke it in half. And of course, I replaced it with a cassette because I was so smart the next day. But and that kind of ages me. But the fact is that there does seem to be a conspiracy against the populace, because I do enjoy, unfortunately, from time to time, like you said, bobbing your head along to a quick rap beat, but I can't. It's come to the point, unfortunately, with the knowledge that you have given, primarily you, and kind of opened my eyes to this, is that I'm aware of what I'm listening to, and I can't get through an entire song. I can enjoy it for a very short period of time. It's much like a very hot salsa on a taco. I can enjoy a couple bites.
I was about to go into the food analogy of it, because, it's an old idea that music is food for the soul. Mm-hmm. Now, you can, to go with the food analogy for a moment, you're not going to die from having a dirty burger. Yeah, if you choose to eat some really, really ghastly fast food one day, it might make you feel a little less self-loved after you've eaten it, but the chances are it's not actually going to poison you to death in that moment. We're all capable of surviving some low vibration, some input, whether it be physical or sonic or whatever it is. We're all capable of surviving some of that. It's a matter of whether that becomes a regular habit, and a matter of whether we are countermanding it with something that is considerably more healthy. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Which is, it's much the same thing as somebody who gets addicted to fast food, and then you offer them some broccoli, and they're like, ugh, what's that? Whereas somebody who's used to eating healthy food, vegetables, might look at some dish from a fast food joint and have exactly that same, ugh, what's that reaction. It's a matter of what we entrain ourselves to be able to enjoy. Now, finding a balance would be a good start. So for those in the audience that are coming to the realization as they're listening to this, that what they are listening to right now, what their listening environment is like, not the environment, the vocabulary of what they're listening to is mainly computerized, mainly non-human, mainly of low vibration of some sort or another. That's okay. You don't have to flip right over into some other kind of, into trying to acknowledge some other kind of musical style here. Just reintroduce things that you think might be better for you. Just like somebody who's got addicted to junk food might start to introduce healthy food back in and learn how to enjoy it again for the sake of their own health.
This is such a big deal and such a big issue, because music is something that almost everybody is heavily reliant upon, even if it is, not when you're relaxing or you're driving in your car and you turn it on. It's infiltrated every portion of our lives. Mm-hmm. But besides, if this music is repetitive and demonic, and it's keeping people down, as we mentioned with hip hop and rap music, as well as others, a lot of pop music, it's keeping people down, idolizing material possessions, and kind of losing empathy for our fellow humans. Not to mention, if these elites at the top of these mysterious groups that are in touch with non-corporeal entities, as alluded to, wouldn't it make sense that they would want to feed these archonic entities, and that they are in fact doing so by promoting this music, it does also seem that this electronic music sort of fits perfectly into this transhuman agenda. And it brings me back, to that saying, there's nothing new under the sun. I think it was Helena Blavatsky that said, the religion of the ancients is the religion of the future. And it does seem as if we've been down this path before. Where does electronic music and the transhumanist agenda, do you think that these are merging?
Well, let's be honest. Music in its originality, in its origin inside humans, was an entirely human-produced phenomenon. And that was something that lasted for tens of thousands of years, if not hundreds of thousands of years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I do not know whether there were other episodes in history that have been lost to our memories where we stepped out from this at another time, but we are in a place right now where the manner in which music is produced is something quite unlike anything that we have been genetically adapted to. Yeah. With the use of computers, it is possible to produce sounds which are then marketed as music, which are not only devoid of any input from humans in the production of that sound, as in there is no human muscle pushing a column of air through a pipe or plucking a string or whatever it might be. It's purely come from digital calculations. There's not just that to it, but with modern music sound technology, it's possible to produce sounds to put down on CDs or MP3s or whatever it is that physically couldn't exist in the real world being produced by a self-vibrating object. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Just to give you a one single incident so that everybody can understand, the use of reverse reverb. Yeah, when you hear reverb and it gets louder into the moment just before you actually hear the sound that it's being produced by.
Mm-hmm.
This is a physically impossible thing to do in the real world. Now, if music is containing sounds, if modern music is containing sounds which are not of this physical realm, well, then where are they coming from? And who is in control of those? And who is more of a denizen of that non-physical world? And why are they pushing their values onto us?
That is a good point. Good point. And it reminds me of the Beastie Boys' Paul Revere song with that backward. Anyway, the reverse reverb.
Sure, and it's one of hundreds of ways in which music is now becoming, it's got nothing to do with the way that objects in the real world, besides a speaker cone being pushed by electric, could produce any kind of sound.
The good news is, through the work of people like yourself, however, we can implement a positive attitude as well, not only, in what we listen to, but in our life, and let other people blame the music they listen to. How can we break this system, better ourselves through music?
Okay, well, for the folk who are not musicians, but are simply lovers of music, I've produced a little course called Soul Food or Poisonous Music, which you can find on TheConsciousMusicSchool.com, which is a little study-at-home course that will take you 2-3 months to get through, which brings your awareness of what values and influences are going through the music that you are listening to. It brings that awareness up to the point that you can begin to make much more conscious choices about what music you are listening to, and why you are listening to it. So that's for the music lovers who are not actually involved in music production itself, non-musicians, if you like. For the musicians, well, I've been playing and changing about with ideas of courses, and seeing as this is something that I haven't been doing for an awful long time on the internet, I've been taking a lot of advice from marketers and things, trying to get courses ready for musicians. And truthfully, at the end of it, I don't really want any of this. I want some simple one-on-one contact with human beings. What I'd like are some apprentices. I'd like to take on some students who are past the point of perhaps grade 3 or 4 in their technical playing already. And I would like to introduce these people to a manner of making music that they have probably never encountered before. A manner where I teach beyond technical or interpretive skills. I teach how to be an artist from the inside out. So I start from digging in people's psyches about what are your values for music? What are you doing it for? Why are you producing music? Because a lot of people, myself included in my younger years, lie to ourselves about why we are producing music. There's a lot of it which gets hooked up with the ego and with self-recognition. And then somewhere later on in our musical careers, we begin to notice that people are being affected by our music, and then we start to tell stories about what is our relationship to our listeners. But actually, in the beginning states of it, we're in a place of self-delusion about why we're doing what we're doing. And the way that I teach, I begin from that very, very deep inside place of the values of what it is and why you're doing it, so that you can come from a clean slate rather than from a place which is already sullied with, lies coming from the ego about what it is that you're doing. And values being the starting point, we then move on to the human aspects of actually being an artist successfully, being an artist that has the skill set and the intention of doing something good for the human race, rather than simply whatever it is that gets me noticed, whatever it is that gets me notorious. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Because in the end, in its root, music starts in the imagination. Yeah? Some of the most astonishing music ever written, late Beethoven, the late Beethoven quartets and the Ninth Symphony and such things, were written by a man who was profoundly deaf. All of that music was going on in Beethoven's mind, not even on a piano in front of him. By the time he got it out onto a score, yes, there were instruments involved, but in its original conception, and actually in the conception of many musicians with great imagination, the start of music is a place that nobody else can hear. It's inside the mind. Now, how does that compare with most people's ways of setting out writing a tune nowadays, where they get a digital audio workstation out and lay a fat beat down and then sit there listening to it for 25 minutes going, what samples shall I layer on top of this? Yeah?
Exactly.
Then finally, when you've got that mind skill set working properly, then I begin to talk about the technicality of how you bring that out into the world. So I'm looking for some apprentices, some students who would like, first of all, who have an understanding that we have gone down a dangerous path with music and would like to do something about that, have the passion that they actually want to be an artist that is bringing good to the human race. That's my kind of that's my boundary. You have to already have that intention before you come to me as a student. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And for those that would like to learn from me, I'll let you know I charge £60 for an hour's tuition. I would like people to come weekly, but if that's too much, people could come fortnightly, so long as they do a decent fortnight's practice in between lessons. Now, that might sound like a lot of money, but let me just remind you, I've taken 40 years of music study. I've been teaching for 30 years. I have as much experience as a professor in a college, that professor in that college would nowadays be charging way more than that for a lesson. And I have students from more than a decade ago who are already charging £40 an hour for their piano lessons. So my iconoclastic teaching method is something that, well, I can't promise that you won't find anywhere else, but I can tell you this, I've not heard of anybody else doing this yet. And part of what I want from my students, from my apprentices, is that they start teaching like this. I don't want to be the only person doing this at all. The whole point of coining this phrase, the Conscious Music School, is not to just talk about a bricks and mortar school or even an online school. I want people to think about the Conscious Music School the way they conceive of the Romantic school, the Classical school, the Baroque school. It's a canon of thought that takes root and blossoms. And I want whoever's listening, who I've just set their heart on fire talking about this, to come and find me and to be part of that.
You are a leader of a musical revolution, in my opinion, and you've chosen the hard path, the path of responsibility, hard work and sacrifice, discipline, humility, and ownership that's going to ultimately lead people to freedom musically. Where can folks get in touch with you, start this process? I recently have been looking at, for my toddler, just piano courses. And, I don't think your prices are unreasonable. I mean, just try booking any kind of music teacher for anything, and your prices are actually quite reasonable. Where can people, if motivated and they want to go down this path, get in touch with you and start living a better life?
Okay, well, the two easiest places to find me are on the net or at TheConsciousMusicSchool.com. Or you can find me on Facebook, where there is a page. If you just put in the search function in Facebook, The Conscious Music School, you'll find a page there where you can get in contact with me as well.
Excellent. I can't thank you enough for coming on today, Simon. You have had an extreme measure of success, in my opinion, at bringing this amazing information to the public. A lot of people are happy living the undisciplined life and listening to music that is unhealthy, unhealthy food for the soul. I like that correlation to the food analogy. And I think we're more capable than that, and we can actually enrich our lives through music. And I think you're doing an excellent job of teaching that. So thanks so much.
Well, thank you for helping me put the word out.
It is always so illuminating talking to Simon. He is the tip of the spear when it comes to this knowledge, in my opinion. It is important to mention about his teaching that he doesn't exclusively teach classical music. He simply espouses the values of it and wishes to reintroduce some of those values back into contemporary music. I found Simon through a mutual friend and podcaster, Chris Matthew, of the Forbidden Knowledge News Network. If you haven't heard of FKN and the podcast, I highly recommend it. So now we know there are influences in the music industry that some secretive groups, without the best of intentions, are using to get their messages of destructive, secret, soul-sucking campaigns out to influence the worldwide population. Some claim sexual, depressive, and violent content are pushed on us as youth through pop music, hip-hop, and rap, and we drag this emotional baggage with us through our adulthood. I know I grew up with and still enjoy listening to snippets of NWA, the Beastie Boys, Too Short, Public Enemy. It's in my brain. Question is, how do we build more positivity in our lives through music now that the damage is done? Well, Simon offers us an option. Subscribe to Simon's courses and classes, all of his efforts, and keep up with him on social media to catch the latest, greatest work by this outstanding individual. Until next time, keep your eyes to the skies, feet on the ground, but don't forget to take a look around.
Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off.